Thanks for the upgrade, my dear. Eric strolled into the living room, grinning like he'd just won the lottery. He tossed his sunglasses onto the coffee table, his tailored suit perfectly pressed, his brand-new designer shoes barely creasing as he walked. His luggage, plastered with high-end logos, spilled onto the floor like a testament to his newfound first class to Europe. 5-star hotels. This is the life I've been missing, Brooke. I couldn't help it. I laughed. Loud and unapologetic, his grin faltered. What's so funny? His tea. I shook my head, still smiling. Oh, Eric, you have no idea what you've done. My name is Brooke. I'm 34 years old. I work in cybersecurity. And for the last 7 years, I've been married to a man who, in hindsight, was a walking red flag wrapped in a charming smile. Eric was always the dreamer, the smooth talker, the one who could spin grand ideas out of thin air. And I was the one who made things happen. While I built a stable career, he hopped from one half-baked scheme to another, always on the verge of his big break that never came. I ignored the warning signs, the financial secrecy, the justifications, the way his promises never quite lined up with reality. I wanted to believe we were a team. And then at 2 a.m. last week, Eric made a mistake he couldn't talk his way out of. I was asleep upstairs when he did it. He must have waited, listening for my breath to even out, making sure I was deep under before sneaking downstairs. He didn't know I had security measures in place, not just for my work but for my own peace of mind. I'd spent years training others to spot fraud, but I never thought I'd have to use those skills in my own home. That night, Eric sat at my desk, opened my laptop and accessed one of my credit cards. He copied the details, snapped a few pictures with his phone, then crept back into bed like nothing had happened. The next morning over coffee I noticed the alerts. Hundreds of them. I opened my banking app. Nearly $50,000 gone overnight. Designer suits, luxury watches, first-class flights to Paris. My stomach tightened, my mind racing. And then, I smiled. The card he'd stolen wasn't a personal account. It was a dummy credit card. A training tool for my company's fraud detection program. Every transaction on it triggered an automatic alert. Directly to the authorities. Eric had no idea he just turned himself into a case study. I called my lawyer Megan that morning. You're not going to believe this, I told her, walking her through every ridiculous detail. There was a pause. Then she burst out laughing. Wait, hold on. He stole a dummy card? The one linked to fraud detection. Exactly. I sipped my coffee, savoring the irony. I don't think he realized what he was doing. He probably thought he was being clever. Megan snorted. Clever? No, Brooke. He's a moron. Every single charge is going to get flagged. I know. Have the authorities contacted you yet? Not yet. But it's only a matter of time. For the rest of the week I stayed quiet, watching. Waiting. Then 2 days later I found a note on the kitchen counter. Taking some time for myself. Don't wait up. I didn't have to guess what that meant. Eric was halfway across the world, blowing through what he thought was stolen money. Every night I watched the fraud alerts roll in. High-end restaurants. 5-star suites. Shopping sprees that would make a billionaire blush. And Eric? He had no idea that with every swipe of that card, he was digging his own grave. Each notification felt like a small victory. 3 days into Eric's spree, my phone rang. Unknown number. I answered, already suspecting who it might be. MS. Carter. This is Agent Hayes, federal investigator. His voice was calm, measured. We've identified significant fraudulent activity tied to your account. Do you know who might be responsible? I didn't hesitate. Yes. My husband. Silence. Then a low whistle. Your husband. I explained everything, the stolen card, the cybersecurity program, the dummy account designed to flag fraud. Hayes let out a dry chuckle. That's a new one. His tone shifted, all business. You'll need to provide a formal statement, but based on what we've already flagged, he's in serious trouble. That was all I needed to hear. By the time Eric walked back through the door, his ego practically dripping off him along with the cologne of expensive hotel rooms, I was ready. He sauntered in like nothing had happened, his arms weighed down with the spoils of his stolen spree. A designer duffel bag hit the floor with a smug thud. Thanks for the upgrade, babe. He grinned, spreading his arms like he expected applause. You really outdid yourself this time. I couldn't stop the laughter that bubbled up. Sharp, unfiltered. His grin faltered. What's so funny? His voice turned wary. I shook my head slowly, savoring the moment. Oh, Eric, you're about to find out. He shrugged off his tailored jacket, draping it over the couch like a king returning from conquest. Seriously though, Brooke, he mused, kicking off his designer shoes. You should have told me about that card ages ago. Imagine how much fun we could have had. I leaned against the kitchen counter, arms crossed. And how exactly did you think this was going to end? He smirked, utterly unfazed. You're always so uptight about money. It's not like you couldn't afford it. I figured you'd get over it once you saw how happy it made me. His sheer audacity might have infuriated me once. But now? It was almost pathetic. So the watches, the flights, the hotels, you thought all of that was just a gift from me? He laughed, pointing at himself. Not thought new. It's about time you loosened up. I smiled, tight-lipped, unreadable. I'll bet. He didn't notice the shift in the air, the weight of inevitability settling over the room. The moment he disappeared into the shower, humming some obnoxious tune, I picked up my phone and texted Megan. He's back. Ready to move forward. Her response was immediate. Perfect. I'll alert Agent Hayes. Over the past week, Megan and Agent Hayes had been methodically building the case. Every charge had been logged, every transaction traced. From the designer boutiques to the five-star suites, Eric's arrogance had painted a picture of someone who thought he was untouchable. And he had no idea just how deep he'd dug his own grave. We'll bring him in for questioning once you're ready, Hayes had told me. But I'd recommend letting him walk into it on his own. The more confident he is, the better. Now, as I listened to Eric's off-key singing echo from the bathroom, I felt an eerie sense of calm. For years, I had let him take advantage of my trust, my kindness, my stability. But this time he was about to face the consequences of underestimating me. When Eric emerged wrapped in a plush towel, grinning like he didn't have a care in the world, he flopped onto the couch. You should have seen Paris, he sighed, reaching into his bag and pulling out a gleaming gold watch. The shops, the restaurants, it was like a dream. Sounds incredible. I leaned against the doorway. Tell me more. And he did. Launched into a detailed, self-indulgent account of his week-long spree, exaggerated hand gestures, unnecessary details about the champagne quality at some rooftop bar, smug little asides about how he fit right in with the rich and powerful. Every word felt like an indictment, a confession he didn't even realize he was making. And the best part? He had no idea my phone was recording the entire conversation. The file already queued up, just waiting to be sent to Agent Hayes. Then with a smirk, Eric held up the watch, admiring it under the light. And the best part? He said, his voice dripping with satisfaction. Nobody suspected a thing. Not even you. Oh, Eric. You have no idea. The next morning, Megan and I met over coffee to finalize the timeline. She scrolled through the compiled evidence, bank statements, fraud alerts, transaction logs, and of course Eric's own recorded confessions. He's got no defense, she said, shaking her head. The fraud alerts, the charges, last night's conversation, it's airtight. She took a sip of her coffee, then smiled. Agent Hayes is ready to bring him in. They were coordinating with local police to execute the arrest. I nodded, the weight of everything finally settling in. And after that? Megan didn't sugarcoat it. He'll face multiple charges: fraud, identity theft, unauthorized use of a financial account. Given the amount involved, this won't be a slap on the wrist. Best case? He cuts a deal. Worst case? He's looking at years behind bars. For a brief second, I wanted to feel sorry for him. But then I remembered the smug grin. The way he'd flaunted his stolen wealth like he was entitled to it. This wasn't a mistake, it was a pattern. A deep-rooted selfishness I had ignored for too long. That evening, Eric lounged on the couch, scrolling through his phone without a care in the world. Then came the knock at the door. Sharp, firm, final. My pulse quickened, not with fear but anticipation. I opened it to find Agent Hayes flanked by two uniformed officers. Good evening, MS. Carter, Hayes said, his voice professional but almost warm. Is Eric home? I stepped aside. Right inside. Feel free to make yourselves comfortable. Eric barely looked up at first, his focus still on whatever meaningless thing he was watching. Then as the officer stepped inside, his brow furrowed. What's going on? He sat up straighter, eyes flicking between me and the agents. Hayes spoke with quiet authority. Eric Miller, you're under investigation for multiple counts of credit card fraud and unauthorized use of financial accounts. We'd like you to come with us for questioning. For a moment Eric just sat there, his mouth slightly open, as if waiting for a punchline that never came. Then his face drained of color. What? No, this has to be a mistake. His voice cracked with something I hadn't heard in a long time, genuine fear. His head snapped toward me. Brooke, tell them this is crazy. I crossed my arms, tilting my head. I don't know, Eric. You've been awfully busy lately. Maybe you should explain it to them. The officers moved in, one reading him his rights while the other secured his hands behind his back. Eric twisted, his voice rising in panic. You can't do this. Brooke, this is a setup. You're my wife. Aren't you supposed to stand by me? I exhaled sharply, shaking my head. Funny. I thought husbands weren't supposed to steal from their wives. I leaned against the doorway. Guess we're both learning something today. His mask cracked. The bravado drained away, leaving behind raw desperation. You won't get away with this. I smiled. Oh, Eric. I already have. The front door shut behind them with a sharp click, leaving behind nothing but silence. For a long moment I just stood there, staring at the empty space where he had been. My heart pounded, not from fear, not from regret, but from the sheer absolute finality of it. He was gone. Finally. But this wasn't over. Not yet. An hour later Megan called. He's with Agent Hayes now, she said, her voice steady. They've started questioning him. And shocker, he's already trying to spin the story. I sighed, rubbing my temples. Let me guess. He's playing the victim. Megan let out a dry laugh. Spot on. He claims you gave him permission to use the card. Of course he does. Doesn't matter. Between the fraud alerts, the charges, and your recording, he doesn't stand a chance. The next morning, Agent Hayes called. We've got everything we need. Your husband, soon-to-be ex-husband, admitted to using the card, but he's trying to claim he didn't know it was tied to a fraud detection program. I rolled my eyes. So he's blaming the mix-up on me? Exactly. But it won't help him. We're moving forward with the charges. He's facing multiple counts of fraud, and given the amount stolen, he's in serious trouble. The banks flagged his luxury purchases. Everything's being reimbursed. You won't be liable for a cent. The relief hit me like a wave. For days, I had carried the weight of Eric's actions, bracing for the possibility that he'd somehow weasel his way out of this. But now it was over. Thank you, I said, exhaling. Hayes chuckled. Don't thank me. This case practically handed itself to us. You handled this brilliantly. The fallout hit Eric harder than I expected. Word spread fast. Our mutual friends, his colleagues, even acquaintances who barely knew us. His carefully crafted image of the charming, carefree husband? Gone. Lisa, the woman I had long suspected he was seeing on the side, dropped him the moment she heard about the charges. The designer goods? Confiscated. The first-class flights? Cancelled. His bank accounts? Frozen. He had nothing left. And then one evening my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer. But curiosity won. Hello. A pause. Then Brooke. Eric. His voice was low, strained. I need to talk to you. I laughed. I couldn't help it. Eric, the only thing you need to do is figure out how to explain yourself to a judge. Please, he said, desperation creeping into his tone. I messed up, okay? I didn't mean for it to go this far. I was just what? My voice was ice. Just trying to steal 50 grand from me? Just hoping I wouldn't notice? Just banking on me being too blind or too forgiving to stop you? Silence. A long empty pause that stretched between us like a chasm. Then finally, in a whisper, I thought you loved me. I closed my eyes, exhaling sharply. My grip tightened around the phone. And when I spoke, my voice was quiet. I did, Eric. I love the person I thought you were. But the man who stole from me? Who lied, manipulated, and thought he could get away with it? That's not someone I could ever love. Before he could respond, I ended the call. And just like that, the last thread tying me to Eric unraveled. A week later, Megan called with an update. He took a plea deal, she said. No jail time, but he has to pay back every cent he tried to steal. Community service, too. And his credit? Wrecked for years. I exhaled, letting the weight of it sink in. That sounds fitting. Right? He always wanted the high life. Megan chuckled. Now he gets to see how the other half lives. I smirked. Karma has a sense of humor. Megan paused. You're handling this way better than most people would. I swirled my wine, watching the deep red catch the light. It's funny. For years I thought Eric was the one holding our marriage together. His charm, his ambition, his big ideas. I let out a quiet laugh. But now? Now I see the truth. I was the one holding everything up. Eric was just dead weight. The day the divorce papers arrived, I poured myself a glass of wine and sat on the couch, looking around the apartment that now felt wholly, completely mine. Eric's absence wasn't a loss. It was a gift. A chance to rebuild without the constant shadow of his selfishness hanging over me. I thought back to that moment when he'd strolled through the door, dripping in stolen luxury, smirking as he mocked me for the upgrade he thought he'd given himself. He'd been so confident, so sure of his brilliance. Now he was the one paying the price. And for the first time in years, I felt truly free. This wasn't just the end of a marriage. This was the beginning of a life I could finally call my own. The apartment was quieter in the days after Eric's arrest. His things were gone, what little he hadn't sold or crammed into his designer duffel. But the space felt lighter, like I could finally breathe again. One afternoon, Megan stopped by, dropping a folder of final paperwork onto my coffee table. "How are you holding up?" she asked. Her usual no-nonsense tone softened just a little. I handed her a cup of coffee, settling into the chair across from her. "Better than I thought I would." I paused, searching for the right words. "I don't even feel angry anymore. Just relieved." She smiled knowingly. "That's because you won. You didn't just survive this, Brooke. You came out stronger." I let her words settle in as we flipped through the last of the documents, finalizing Eric's financial restitution. It wasn't just about the money, though knowing he'd be paying back every cent did feel poetic. It was about reclaiming my independence. For years, I had let Eric dictate the terms of our marriage. I thought it was easier to keep the peace. But now, I understood something I should have realized a long time ago. Peace built on silence and compromise isn't peace at all. A week later, the official divorce decree arrived in an unassuming envelope, far too small to contain something so monumental. I sat at the kitchen table, running my fingers over the paper before tearing it open. My eyes skimmed the legal jargon until I found the words that mattered most. Finalized. Irrevocable. It wasn't the life I had imagined when I married Eric. I had pictured stability, partnership, a future built on trust. But as I looked around the home I had rebuilt for myself, I realized something. I had gained something better. Freedom, clarity, and the knowledge that I was stronger than I had ever given myself credit for. That evening, Megan showed up at my door with a bottle of wine and a carton of my favorite takeout. She raised her glass, grinning. To new beginnings. I clinked mine against hers. And to the absolute dumpster fire I just walked away from. We laughed, and for the first time in a long time, I felt nothing but lightness.
No regret. No anger.
Just the quiet, undeniable certainty that my life, my real life, was finally beginning. I laughed, raising my glass. To never settling for less than I deserve. Over the next few weeks, I began shaping what my new life would look like. I redecorated the apartment, adding bold colors and personal touches that finally made it mine. I took the solo vacation I had dreamed about for years, driving along the coast, soaking in the kind of peace that only comes when you leave everything behind, even if just for a little while. Eric made a few half-hearted attempts to reach out, through mutual acquaintances, vague apologies over email, even a laughably tone-deaf letter claiming he had changed. I never responded. There was nothing left to say. He had made his choices, and I had made mine. Every now and then, I'd hear updates about him through the grapevine. He was struggling to find work, his reputation tarnished by the fraud charges. The life of luxury he had flaunted so shamelessly was gone. He had moved back in with his parents, still clinging to the belief that he could charm his way out of the mess he had created. I didn't feel sorry for him. If anything, I felt relief. Because for the first time in years he wasn't my problem anymore. A month after everything had been finalized, I stood by my window, sipping coffee as the city woke up below. Sunlight poured into the apartment, catching the fresh coat of paint I had chosen, my favorite shade of blue. The space no longer felt like a battleground, felt like home. I thought back to the journey that had led me here. For years I had believed in the promise of marriage, in the illusion of building a life with Eric. I had ignored the small nagging voice inside me, the one that whispered something was off, that warned me his charm was just a mask for selfishness. But now I understood something important. Walking away wasn't failure. It was strength. That weekend I met Brooke for brunch, a new ritual we had started since Eric's exit. Over mimosas and waffles she leaned in and asked, "So what's next for you?" I smiled, a quiet sense of excitement settling in my chest. "Honestly, I'm just focusing on myself. Work's great and I've been thinking about a longer trip. Maybe somewhere quiet, near the mountains." She raised her glass. "That's what I like to hear. You deserve it." And for the first time in a long time I truly believe that. No compromises. No second-guessing. Just freedom, the kind that comes when you start living life on your own terms. Occasionally, mutual acquaintances would still mention Eric. He was bouncing from one low-paying job to the next, trying and failing to rebuild what he had lost. The designer suits, the luxury vacations, the reckless spending, all gone. He wasn't prepared for reality. I didn't dwell on it. He had made his choices, and I had made mine. The last time I heard from him was in an email, a long, rambling apology that was more self-pitying than sincere. I read the first few lines. Then, without hesitation, I hit delete. I didn't need closure from him. I had already found it in myself. That evening I sat on my balcony with a glass of wine, watching the city lights flicker in the distance. I thought about everything I had been through, the betrayal, the heartbreak, the fight to reclaim what was mine. It hadn't been easy, but it had been worth it. I no longer felt angry or bitter. If anything, I felt grateful, because Eric's betrayal had forced me to confront my own strength, to stop compromising, to start prioritizing myself. I had learned to trust my instincts, to value my independence, and to never again let someone else take the reins of my life. I raised my glass to the night sky. "Here's to me," I whispered. "Here's to starting over." And just like that, I closed the chapter on Eric for good, ready to embrace whatever came next.